Okay, we are live. Sweet. Let me let all these lovely people in to join me. Oh, my favorite people. Danielle and Lori, awesome. Oh my goodness, this is going to be a fun Training Tuesday. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Training Tuesday for practitioners. We're here to talk all things functional anatomy and client work and all the good things. Hey, Danielle, it's nice to see you. Hello. And here comes Lori. Awesome. And for those of you who've been here 100 times or more, hey, Lori, I'm so glad that you're back. I love our time together and pouring into you on Tuesdays. Tuesday tidbits, as Lori calls them. I may officially change the name. I know I keep threatening that every week, but I'm super, either way, whatever we call it, I'm just so glad that we're here. Practitioner Corner feels fun too, but there's no like iteration on that. My point is, if you've been here before, thank you for being here. I love the inspiration that you bring. And if you've never been here before, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here. We meet on Tuesdays at noon Eastern to talk all things body, functional anatomy, mechanics, client work, all the good stuff. Here comes another one of my favorite. I just love all practitioners. I feel like I have an affinity for practitioners. It almost doesn't matter who'd be here. I just call you all my favorites. So Laura's heading in, and that's awesome too. If you're here for the first time, welcome. It's a super fun group. Hey, Laura, it's nice to see you. And I'm your host for at least the first couple of minutes anyway. I'm Gina Schatz. I'm the developer of the Schatz Method. I work clinically as both a manual and a movement practitioner. And along the way, I developed a method that works. And I teach other practitioners that method too. But if you're not here to learn the method, that's okay, because there's still a whole lot to talk about as far as functional mechanics goes. Whether you're movement or manual practitioner, we have something here for you. So today what I want to talk about is kind of like pulling it out of the archives, old school way. I want to talk about standing. I want to talk about standing and how freaking awesome standing is in the body, and all the ways that it's awesome and all the ways that we might miss its awesomeness. So yeah, I was recalling that a few times along the way, clinically, working with standing for folks has felt like a lot of work for them. And some people say, well, yeah, standing is hard because who wants to stand all day? And my rebuttal to that is, but we ought to be able to stand effortlessly. The work in standing, the real work, the only work, is opposing gravity. And when we oppose gravity with the right group of muscles, we actually feel stronger. We feel effortless. But if we're not opposing gravity with the right group of muscles, we can feel taxed for sure. So some of you guys that are here, I know you're like, oh, I know what she's talking about. I know what group of muscles that is, and that's awesome. And I want to just give a little bit of background to what I'm talking about here with this group of muscles. And by the way, there's more going on in standing. We're just starting at the first bit. The first bit, why standing could feel taxing for folks, is if they're not using a group of muscles called intrinsic muscles. And this is one of those things that I went searching for. I remember one day actually being in my clinic, in my office setting, where I had books and books and books. And I would absolutely have no problem pulling out a book if I was looking up something while a client was with me, no problem. But it was after a couple of long days with working with clients, and I was searching for an answer. And I remember standing at these books and like piercing the spines of these books with my eyes, wondering which book had the answer that I was missing. And I went looking and looking, and I realized it wasn't in there, that I was looking for something that wasn't there. And so along the way, as I've been working with intrinsic muscles, because I figured it out that that was what was missing. And as I've been working with intrinsic muscles and talking to other practitioners about intrinsic muscles, what I realize is we're not taught intrinsic muscles. At least we weren't up until then, and even up until now. A few years ago, I was working with a group of yogis who were in training, and there was somebody in the audience in the group who it wasn't on stage, it was a group, someone who was in the group, and she was getting a master's in physical science and did not have training yet on intrinsic muscles. And I thought, wow, even at a master's level in a major university, we're just kind of missing out on this piece up until now, because here we are talking about that. So that is always my intention, is to not repeat what you already know, but to give you what maybe you don't know, because that's how I was learning. So there's two groups of muscles in the body, classified as two groups, first being phasic, second one being intrinsic. Phasic muscles are the ones we know the names of. We talk about them. We even give them nicknames: the quads, the hams, hamstrings and quadriceps, the biceps, bis and triceps. And those muscles do major movement. They are the ones that you see the body actively taking shape or actively doing something. They're the ones that we use to lift up a bag of groceries and to walk up a flight of stairs and to get ourselves across a room. And they're the ones that we are, quote, working out when we're training, doing anything, whether it's Pilates or personal training or anything in between. Even yoga, step back. You use leg muscles, you use phasic muscles to do that, actually hip muscles, but you use phasic muscles to make that happen. And most people know the names of them, and they are wired even differently from the body or from the brain to move the body. But intrinsic muscles are this other whole group of muscles. There's hundreds and hundreds of them, and we don't see them moving. Their job is not to get you across the floor, not to pick up a bag of groceries, not to walk up a flight of stairs. Their job is twofold. It's posture and balance. And when we say posture, at least in the method, in the Schatz method, we're knowing that posture is posture, but it's also alignment. And there's external alignment and there's internal alignment. And we work on internal alignment, of course, with our measurements and all the tools that we use. But even if we're working on external alignment, there is an optimal place for the body to be in space relative to its axis. And when the body is in that optimal space relative to its axis, it is engaging muscles intrinsically. If it's not in alignment relative to its axis, it's not engaging intrinsically. It can't. Muscles can only do the job that they're doing. So if we're not in alignment, if we don't have optimal posture, we can't use the muscles that do that job of optimal posture because we're not in it. It's kind of like saying, I can't use phasic muscles to do flexion of the hip if I'm not flexing my hip. Right? You're not doing the action. You're not using the muscle to do it. So it's really not like we just use intrinsic muscles better if we're in alignment. We actually can't use them if we're not doing the job that they do, which is posture and balance. So we got to know where internal and external alignment is to be able to engage intrinsic muscles. And once we engage intrinsic muscles, by nature of what they're doing, they are opposing gravity. So when we are moving our body away from gravity, we're engaging intrinsically. And I was just in a training with a practitioner, and we were talking about push-ups. And although push-ups look like there's movement, so there's phasic activity, you physically see the person moving, there's joint action happening. It's absolutely a phasic action for sure. And we're moving the body away from gravity, which means we would do best to engage intrinsically to do that, because those are the muscles that do that job. Okay, maybe a different topic, because we're talking about standing today. But anytime you're moving away from gravity, anytime you're aligning the body away from gravity, lifting up out of your seat, reaching from the crown of your head up to the sky, all these cues that we give people to get themselves into alignment, all of that activity is away from gravity. Hey, Coda, all of that activity is away from gravity, which means it is intrinsically engaging, which is lovely. And that's the name of the game. So if we talk about a static posture like standing is meant to be opposing gravity. We're literally in opposition to gravity. We're in opposition to gravity all the time, by the way, because if we're not reaching away from gravity, it's a constant, it will pull us down. And if we're not opposing that, we're not strengthening intrinsically, right? Anytime we're engaging a muscle to do a job, we're strengthening it. So anytime we're engaging a muscle to optimally stand, to be in balance, to be in posture, we're strengthening it. So we're either, the use it or lose it idea is real. We're either using a muscle and we're strengthening it, or we're not using it and we're losing the strength in it. And I would add to that, it's got to be in alignment first. And that's phasic or intrinsic. You got to have alignment first to be able to strengthen a muscle and then optimize function. So if we're talking intrinsically, we must be in alignment in our axis. We must have optimal posture and then move away from gravity to strengthen intrinsically. And most people aren't doing that when they're standing. And so then they end up getting opposed by gravity and feel fatigued because gravity is winning the game of strength. And then they start moving down towards gravity, or they start leaning, or they start slouching. And then they're like, I can't freaking stand, I need to sit, because they're not using the muscles to do the job. So the muscles that do the job aren't getting stronger, which means the job feels hard. And that is true whether it's a phasic muscle or an intrinsic muscle. Right. Okay, so Phasic muscles and intrinsic muscles, two different classifications of muscles. If you're still learning those, that's totally cool. We go over it inside our academy a lot because, again, it's like a big piece for us. So we talk about it in Inspired Beyond Anatomy. We talk about it again in Inspired Beyond Anatomy Level 2. We talk about it again in Applied Functional Anatomy. We just kind of like keep going at it. And intrinsic strength is the third touchstone in our method. So it's really important for us to know as practitioners if we're navigating folks out of pain. In fact, as I was standing there looking at my bookshelf and trying to figure out what was I missing, why was I supporting clients only up to a certain point, but I couldn't actually get them to 100% pain relief and get it to stay, I was looking for this piece. I was looking for intrinsic engagement. And when I started adding that in, the results that I was creating, instead of being like 70 percentile effectiveness, I was getting upwards of 100% effectiveness in the work that I was doing to get folks out of pain. So this is a biggie. And if I've appealed to you to learn more about it, that's awesome. And if we can support you in that, for sure, let us know, because we do go over it quite a bit inside our academy. The other thing I want to talk about in standing is just what's happening phasically and what is alignment for other joint actions. Meaning, if we're standing and we say, oh, you know what? And I know some of you guys are here and just like me, I have dance in my background. I stand like a ballerina. I stand with my toes turned out. That's the way I was trained to stand, and I'm poised when I stand that way. And just like me, it's tempting to want to keep doing that. But when we're standing with our toes turned out, what we're actually creating is lateral rotation in the hips. And when we are creating a joint action anywhere along the body, there's muscles involved in doing that. The idea with standing is that it gets to be a neutral position for the body, not an actively held position for the body. And so standing in yoga is Tadasana, standing for standing is standing, standing for gym activities is getting yourself in position. Like there's all different ways that we call standing whatever it is that we're working on. And the key is that we want to be in neutral joint alignment, no matter what activity we're up to, whether it's standing at the office or working out in whatever way that we like to move our body. So in standing, in Tadasana, in whatever it is that you're calling it, we want to have neutral joint alignment, meaning can the body hold its own without having to brace with a muscle, a phasic muscle, and can the body stand on its own without the joints being involved in any movement? Where's our neutral starting place? Where's our like whiteboard clean of activity? So that standing just becomes a phasically strengthening activity, or excuse me, an intrinsically strengthening activity, and there's no phasic activity in standing because there's no movement. So I would know that I needed to engage, I'll say it a different way. I would know that I would need to engage a joint action and engage phasic muscles if I was moving, because that's their job. But if I'm standing, there's no movement. So there's no phasic muscles actively engaged to do that. Meaning I shouldn't have any joint actions then. Lateral rotation of the hip or medial rotation of the hip or spine flexion, lateral spine flexion, any joint action that would be happening, or protracted scapula, any joint action that would be happening is done by phasic muscles, which means in order for me to be utilizing them the way they're designed, I would also then be moving. I wouldn't be in a held position. So we want to be able to stand in neutral, and we get to know what neutral is for all the joints and then bring a body to that position. And when it's not able to do that, that's when we start getting into our investigative caps and like, oh, well, what's happening where this body is actually having a hard time standing? What's it bracing? What's it compensating for? What recruitment patterns might be here? What injuries might it be pulling away from? Or what intrinsic strength is missing that the body is now recruiting phasic muscles to do a job that intrinsically we're not strong enough to do the job that we're doing? So let's just go back again. Intrinsic muscles jobs are posture and balance, which also AKA alignment and balance, internal and external alignment, posture / balance. Those are the two jobs of intrinsic muscles. Phasic muscles do gross motor movement. Again, they're wired differently from the brain than intrinsic muscles. Their job is to do gross motor movements, things that you see, big actions, flexion of the elbow, extension of the hip, et cetera, walking across the floor, walking up a flight of stairs, picking up something heavy, whether it be at the gym or at the grocery store. Cool. Those are phasic muscles are the ones that do that job. So if I'm doing movement like that, I would be engaging intrinsically and there would be joint action, because the way the body creates those types of movements is by creating a movement at a joint. That's how we create movement. Phasic muscles move a joint, joints do the movement, muscles do the movement at the joint. It's one of the principles of anatomy. We talk about that in a course called Applied Functional Anatomy. And we, of course, talk about intrinsic and phasic muscles there because they're sort of yoked together as we speak. So if I'm talking about a particular action in the body and the action is standing, there's no gross motor movement in that, which means that it's a posture movement. The action is posture. The action is balance. The action is not a joint action like elbow and hip flexion. So there would be more intrinsic work being done to stand than phasic work. So there's no joint actions. There's no muscles that do joint actions. There's intrinsic muscles holding me away from gravity to stand. And when we can't do phasic actions optimally, we've talked about that in lots of training Tuesdays before, there's usually a compensatory pattern. When we can't do intrinsic action optimally, often a compensatory pattern. And so our job is to know, like, what's the action? What's the body up to? What muscle is supposed to do that job? What group of muscles is supposed to do the job? What actual muscle is supposed to do the job? And can it do it? And if it can't, how do I support it to do the job? Because as soon as we create optimal function in the body, there's no pain. As soon as we put the body back into alignment, there's no pain. And if there's restriction in getting the body back into alignment, or there's restriction in getting the body back into optimal function, that's our role. That's why those of us who are here doing orthopedic and corrective type work, that's what we're up to. We got to know how it works to be able to see that there's a discrepancy and then know how to return it back to the way it works. So when it comes to standing, it's intrinsic engagement mostly, and there's no joint action. And in standing, there's also lots of places to look on how to create optimal alignment in all of the joints. And I'll just give you one, and then we'll pause for Q&A, and I'll open the mics back up to you guys. But one of the ways that we can really identify optimal alignment in standing is what's happening with the toes and the knees. And I'm just going to add here that we don't actually correct anything in the toes or the knees, but that's where our visual assessment can look at a bigger picture of what's happening in someone's body. It's also what the clients can relate to. If we have them standing in front of the mirror and we say, look, I want you to put, no action in your hip joint right now. What? But if we say to them, looking in front of the mirror, I want you to align your patella so that they're square with the mirror like headlights, and I want your toes to be facing 12 o'clock just like that. Now they have somewhere that they can look to know that there is no rotation happening in their hip joints because they have bony landmarks to keep their eyes on to check for that. And when their toes are forward and their kneecap patella are forward, there is no lateral or medial rotation in the hip, which means there is the absence of joint action, that joint action in the hip when standing. And that's what we want to do, is to create neutral alignment in their standing so that they are not engaging physically and have the opportunity to engage intrinsically, and then teach them how to do that. Oh my gosh, I got it in 20 minutes. I did the whole thing in 20 minutes. Okay, awesome, great. So now what I'd like to do with the rest of the time that we have here is to turn it over to you guys. So if you have any questions and you're not able to come on camera or to use your microphone, you can absolutely use the chat feature and type in your question. Rhonda, I saw you come in. I'm glad you're here. Welcome. You can absolutely use the chat feature and type in your question, and I will happily answer that if you don't want to talk live. And of course, if you're watching on the replay, you can also put your comments in the question in the comments below, and I will always answer them directly. And if you are here and you are able to use your mic and be on camera and you might have a question, perfect, because I like to be hot seated. It feels like you guys are being hot seated, but the truth is, hey, Rhonda, hi. But the truth is that I'm being hot seated because I don't have any preparation for what your questions are. So let that just calm your nerves. If you've not asked a question live before, it's totally okay. We're just here to be in support of each other. So how can I support you? What questions do you have? And it can be about standing, it could be about intrinsic muscles, or it can be about anything else that you're working on. questions from the crowd? Anybody?
Hey, it's not really a question. It's more of just an observation and a comment. Danielle and I were talking about this morning, like the value and holy cow in standing. When we think it has to be all these other movements to find it and to find a stretch and to find strength and all of that, when we bring folks back to standing, we see so much, like you just said, Gina. Can you stand there for 90 seconds, for a minute? And then, we start to shift around, and just the value of having people stand for a bit of time and observing.
Mm-hmm.
And then they also, and just like you said about letting them to see their toes forward and their knees forward, and letting the realization come to them as like, oh, this is challenging, or this is really easy, or it's whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah. And one of the things that you said, Lori, it's true that whenever we're engaging intrinsically and in optimal alignment, there is a feeling of effortlessness, right? That feeling that dancers go for, where they're like, I feel buoyant, I feel light. You don't have to be a dancer to have that experience. You have the same muscles that a dancer has, but we don't always get ourselves into alignment. And then we become kind of like our body gets burdened with whatever we're asking it to do. And gravity is a constant. So we have to find a way to have strength to oppose gravity, for sure. Is there something particular, Lori, or like repetitive that you see your clients when you're asking them to stand, that it's sort of like the same 2 or 3 things that they come back with in explaining how and why their standing is challenging, or why it's hard for them?
Yeah, I was just noticing last night with the class I taught to the cyclists, there was a lot of external lateral rotation in the hips. Toes forward and hip width was interesting. Also, there was a lot of wide bases. And it wasn't a class that I was ticky-tacking everything for that. It's just a quick, like, let's look at it and explore and stand here. And as folks were standing, we start to round a little bit or lock the knees, or just, it was so interesting. Mm-hmm. And then I was thinking about it. I'm like, whoa, realization for me is that if these folks are having a challenge standing, and they're going out and riding 100 miles on their bikes, I was like, my head exploded a little bit. Right? Yeah.
They need you.
Yeah, that's what I noticed. And I kept it really simple, like simple standing, big joint actions about what's happening and not happening in the body when we cycle, right? There's parts of us that aren't really moving. And they were like, and they came in thinking, oh, we're going to have this yoga class, and we stood, right? and we balanced, and we strengthened our glutes, where cyclists that I noticed last night, there wasn't a lot of strength in the glutes, just like me. So it was such an aha moment. I was telling Danielle this morning, Gina, and this was from, I think, was it last week that we talked about collaborating and staying in our lanes?
Yep.
So I'm almost at the end of like 20 minutes with these folks, and I'm going through lengthening and strengthening. And there were 2 women that turned out to be physical therapists in the room. And I had that little bit of flutter, like, oh, they know more than me. And I was like, no, it's fine. And I even asked them, I'm like, is there anything that you're like, would you like to contribute? Like, is there anything that you're seeing? And they're like, no, you got it all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, good girl. That's right.
It was such a culmination of all of our Tuesday tidbits, like in one little 20-minute thing.
Right. And question, not to put the PTs on notice or anything, but were the PTs also needing some guidance from you about optimal standing?
Well, the one, interestingly enough, the one had a sprained ankle, so her ankle was in a boot. And the other one was very locked standing, her feet, she had a wide base. Her feet were much wider than hip width, and her knees were locked.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And how was it for her to update her standing to what you were offering?
It was a little bit all over the place because we were in a circle and they were talking, and like there was a lot of conversation and things happening. So did I notice, you know what? So I had him stand for basically the whole class, and then we did some shoulder rotations and some strengthening, and we all started out this way, right? And then we this way, and then this way. Here's my toes. So I did notice that at the end that she was back to her wide base locked knees.
Mm-hmm. Right. So awesome. Awesome that you were inviting partnering into a group where there's other practitioners, and you caught yourself like, don't take yourself out of the game. That's,
right.
Don't do the same things. And luckily we're all in existence. And I don't know if this was exactly how the comment was when she's like, no, you got it. It's not like you needed her permission or her approval. Mm-mm. Because I know you were teaching her things that were different than what she knows.
Right.
And you saw that in her body, that that optimal standing and intrinsic engagement was not what she focuses on. That's not what PTs do. It's what we do. Right. So she could also probably take you through a treatment setting where you would be like, wow, I didn't even know you could do that. I don't know that test. I don't know that particular movement or whatever it is that she would do for your body. So it goes both ways. So we never get to take ourselves out of the game. You guys are experts, especially my master grads. You guys are experts. So you get to hold that for sure. And I want to also just address this in case anybody who's here is questioning this, because it came up a few months ago, actually, where somebody who had come to Training Tuesday, or someone who had shared Training Tuesday, I can't remember exactly how it went, but there was questions about whether we should be standing with our toes out. And I understand the question. And I think where it comes from, meaning turned out at, 11 and 2 o'clock or 11 and 1 o'clock, that would be. And I think the reason that comes up is because in all of our anatomy charts, if you look at them, they don't show us directly on from the toes. They turn a little bit so that you can see the musculature, right, and have more to look at. But that's technically not neutral alignment, because there is joint action when you turn your toes out. And we know that because we know what joint action is. So I think it stems from, well, that's the way it looks on the chart, so why wouldn't I look the way I look on the chart? I'm guessing. I don't know exactly where that comes from. And also a lot of us find comfort in our patterns. So it's not comfortable for me to stand with my toes out, but it was at one time because it was a pattern. And so if that's coming up for anybody who's here and watching, I just want to appeal to you to go back through what joint action is in the hips. It's 360, so there's a lot of options. Go back through what joint action is in the hips, and then go back through what muscles do that joint action. And do you need those muscles to walk with? So I'll give you a quick shortcut here. Lateral rotation of the hip is deep 6, so piriformis and the go-go queens, and those are not needed in walking. What happens in walking is hyperextension of the hip. Those muscles don't do that action. So that's how you decide, like, am I supposed to look like the picture? Don't go by outside check boxes. Go by internally what you know about mechanics, and that's how you resolve. That's how you resolve that. So I just wanted to add that. And then Lori, you mentioned that, and Rhonda, I see your love note. I'm coming back to that. Lori, you mentioned that you noticed with the cyclist that their glute max was not as strong as it could be. It wasn't engaging. I'm putting you on the hot seat. So functionally, how does that get created? How do glute maxes, you said, just like me, how do glute maxes become less strong than they need to be?
Because we're not using them in hip extension. When our leg is back from our hip, or something else is taking over, right? QL, I think, usually pops in there. Is that what you were looking for?
Yeah, the only way a muscle can get stronger is if it does its job.
Right.
So we know, and you got to know muscles. You guys got to know muscles. You guys who are watching, you got to know muscles. So glute max does hyperextension of the hip, right? So if we're not using a muscle to do its job, it can't get stronger. And we can still do the job, but we could distort that and compensate and recruit other muscles to do a job it's not supposed to do, because our body will do whatever we ask it to do, even if it's not able. And so if you think about just the lever system, right, the lever system on its own would dictate the answer to why glute max is not strong enough in a lot of people, because we spend more time standing. Excuse me, Jesus.
Yeah.
I just totally blew my punchline. We spend more time sitting, and the lever system says that the front of the hip muscles engage and get shorter, and the back of the hip muscles lengthen and get longer. And they're not getting stronger if they're lengthened. They're also not getting stronger if they're held in a shortened position, but that's a different topic. So if the muscle's lengthening, it's not strengthening. And if we're seated, our glute max muscles, spindles are lengthening. They cannot strengthen when we're seated. So they're lengthened. So then we go to stand up and we bring them back to a neutral position, but then we need to strengthen them by hyperextending the hip, meaning the femur moves behind. And then the muscles got to do that job and not recruit somebody else to do the job for it. So it's really, like you said, Lori, just like me, just like all of us. I bet you if we tested all of us, we all could use a little more glute max love, unless you've been really focused on it and you know how to engage that when you're walking, for example. So it's really kind of prevalent, you know, across the board, that we want to really update that hip function in those two muscles specifically, two muscle groups, the flexors and the extenders, which also do hyperextension. Okay, we could go on that one. Lori, just amazing group. I love that you did your cyclist. I know you were working up to that, and look at all the value you brought them. And I hope that they all saw all that and are lining up to have more support from you, because clearly they could use it.
It was great. Yeah, they were like, holy cow, I had no idea. For me, it's, you know, it's the world we live in, right? So for us, it's sometimes we see it easier and more clearly. For folks that don't, it was an aha. And I was like, oh yes, it sparked a little bit of curiosity.
Perfect. Yeah, and we tend to, when we learn stuff and then know it, I see this a lot, we tend to forget our impact because it becomes so simplified for us. We're like, oh, is it supposed to be this easy? Yeah, life's meant to be easy and fun. It's not meant to be like through the whole thing, including posture and body work, or even exercise. It's meant to feel amazing to move your body, right? But we're so used to having pain and injury and restriction and poor alignment that then leads to discomfort that we think then it's all just supposed to be an uphill grind. It's not true. Meant to be effortless. When you move your body the way it's designed, there is no pain. It's only freedom. And that includes when we're working out or dancing or yoga or whatever. So awesome. So anyway, I could go on about that. There's one more piece though that I do want to bring up and tie it back to our initial conversation about intrinsic strength in standing. And as you mentioned, Laura, you saw a bunch of things in standing, and after they were standing for several minutes, you started to notice them like sternum to the ground, right? The key with intrinsic muscles is that when you are in optimal alignment and engaging the muscles by moving away from gravity, they get stronger. When you're not using those muscles, gravity's always still winning. And gravity is the nemesis of, it's just actually not really the nemesis, it's an antagonist of intrinsic muscles. So one of them is pulling. It's either gravity or it's the strength of the intrinsics. And in order for it to be strength of the intrinsics, we have to choose that. If we're not choosing that, gravity's still pulling, which means we will start to see the body move down towards the ground. So that's one of the key indicators that you get to address your client's intrinsic strength based on which direction are they moving. If they're standing upright and doing their best and they're just a little cockeyed and we need to do something about their structural health, great. But if over a few minutes, like 2 or 3, they start to then move towards the ground, that's the absence of intrinsics, because gravity is saying in the arm wrestle between the two, gravity's winning. So that should be key for you in your treatment plans. What do I get to add here? It's not more bench presses or leg lifts or whatever, right? It's not more phasic work is the point. It's not more joint action that moves phasically. Okay, awesome. All right. So Rhonda had sent in a beautiful love letter. Please talk about body workers not releasing every tight muscle that they find in a client's body. Okay, Rhonda, I love your question. I could talk about that till the cows come home. I get a little heated and impassioned when I do talk about it. And I'm wondering why you're asking, Rhonda. Is it because you think that practitioners need to know it? Or is it because you heard me say it before and you want clarity about why I said that? I'd love to know the context behind your question. That would really support me. But I'll just take a wild guess here. So starting with, and we've talked about this in other training Tuesdays, go back and find those recordings if it matters to you. There's more than one type of tightness in the body. There's more than one type of tightness, and only one of them requires, hold on, Rhonda, what are you saying here? I don't know why sometimes I go to look at the chat and YouTube will just start talking at me. It's just super fun. I love tech. I love tech because that's why we're all here. We're mainly, I think you're saying we're mainly told or taught to release everything. Yes, Rhonda, we are as body workers. Same with yogis, by the way. They think everything should be stretched. I say this a lot. I throw us all under the bus equally in a way to catch everybody's attention, not to be rude, but I'm both, so it's fair to say. But Rhonda, we are taught that. And so I'm asking you from your framework, I haven't worked with you before, so do you know that that's incorrect? Or are you thinking that it's incorrect and you want to know what to do about it? I'd love to know more about why that request to talk about that. Is there a specific question you have in your request, or you just want it stated? That's really what I'm after. So we did talk about this a few other training Tuesdays. We've been here for a couple of years now, so it's very possible we talked about it more than once. And the idea is that there's more than one type of tightness in the body. Muscles do just about anything we ask them to. And Rhonda says, I'm also intrigued by your statement. Yes, I know, not that it is incorrect by hearing you speak. I'm also intrigued by your statement. Which statement? Yes, I know, not that it is incorrect by hearing you speak. Okay, not clear, Rhonda. I need more content. Type in fuller sentences, or if you can, just talk into your mic so I can hear you, because I can get a more valuable answer for you if I know exactly what the question is. So I'll give it a whirl here while you're typing in your next part of the question. There's more than one type of tightness. I think I've said that now 3 times because I keep interrupting myself. And only one of the types of tightness require lengthening or releasing or stretching. So in applied functional anatomy, I talk about one of the principles of anatomy being that stretching doesn't exist, and it doesn't. Brain doesn't even know how to stretch. It stretches in response to contraction. That's a lever system rule. We talk about that in, like I said, applied functional anatomy. If you could also just get the anatomy guide download from the website and it'll walk you through that. And we go through it in great detail in that course, because it's a concept that then changes how you instruct movement if you're a movement professional, and it absolutely changes what you do for someone's pain if you're a manual practitioner. Because just addressing the muscle that feels tight by stretching it or releasing it is not the answer. In fact, in a lot of ways, you can make it worse. If you know the differences in the types of tightness that come up in a muscle, it will get so clear for you. You're like, oh my God, I would never stretch that. And it can feel tight. So yes, releasing everything is not the answer. Rhonda says, sorry, I now know from your discussion that releasing every tight muscle is not helpful. Okay, awesome. I'm glad you got that here. Yay for the win. And so you want to know more about that, I'm guessing. You heard it, you're gleaning that from our discussion, and now you want to know more about that. So let me know exactly. Yes, please. Okay, great. And if I touch on it and I cover it for you, great. If there's another question that you have that I don't exactly cover for you in the reasons why, please keep typing it into the chat so it matters to me that I answer your questions. That's why I'm asking. Okay. So not all types of tightness need to be released. And when you know the 5 types of tightness, you'll realize that even some of them can be made worse by releasing or stretching them. So that's number 1. You got to know those types of tightness. And basically the idea of all of them is knowing where origin and insertion are relative to each other. Now, I'm not saying you have to memorize every origin and memorize every insertion in a muscle. You can, for sure. The more you know about the body, the more you know. But as a massage therapist, I did learn all the origins and insertions, and that doesn't teach you about movement necessarily. It implies that you'll figure out movement by knowing where origins and insertions are, but it doesn't teach you movement. And the flip is true for movement practitioners. They know muscles, but they don't actually know where they start from and where they end up. So they don't know what movement that muscle should actually be making when it's healthy. And so if we're not clear on origins and insertions and healthy movement, we could be doing compensatory movement and then adding weight bearing to that, and that becomes a problem. But I digress just a tiny bit here. Okay, so back to Rhonda's question, not everything that is tight should be released. And I basically start our mastery training track like this. And I say it a lot, so it's okay if you feel rubbed about it, because we always work it out. And what I say is massage therapists want to put their thumbs and their elbows into everything to release it. And yoga teachers want to stretch everything to release it. And neither of those is effective, even in the type of tightness that does require lengthening and releasing. So there's a whole lot more value when we understand the lever system and the way the body is designed before we start layering techniques onto what to do about a symptom, right? So if I know that the lever system is designed to contract, contraction is the action, and then response to that action is lengthening, and it is. I didn't make that up. We came like that. Every person came like that. Awesome. That makes it really easy for me to not mess up because everybody's the same. Contraction's the action. That's what the brain is wired to do. And because we have lever systems at every joint, the response to that action is to lengthen the other side. Response. It's not an active action from the brain. It's a response to what's happening in the action side. So that's straight up lever system. If right there you're like, what the frig did she just say? Then let us support you and get some knowledge around lever systems and muscle action and joint action so that it makes sense to you, because every joint in the body is like that. And all bodies have the same anatomy. So if I know that the action is contraction and lengthening is the response to that, that's number one in knowing my anatomy. Then there's a couple things that you get to know about when things go wrong. And I brought up before, there's several types of tightness. So we dive into those types of tightness. I think we've done that here. Like I said, I think we've done that a few times in Training Tuesday, and we definitely go through the mastery program like that. And we talk about it in other courses too. Even if you're not in the mastery program, you got to know what tight really means. The body has a very limited vocabulary, but it will always communicate with you. So clients will often come in and say, oh, it just feels so tight. And it's our job to know, is it tight because it's tight in a ball, or is it tight because it's so lengthened like a rubber band that's ready to pop? They both feel tight, but they require very different responses from us. Meaning, my technique to dig my elbow into something, or my technique to take someone into a stretch because I know to move origin and insertion away from each other, might not be the right technique for that type of tightness. So we got to know what type of tightness it is before we go after it with any particular technique. And once you know the type of tightness, then it's super easy. Like, oh, well, I need to bring the origin insertion actually back together from that rubber band that's being stretched so hard. Or I do need to move the origin and insertion away from each other because they are bound up tight like a ball. You get to figure that out. That's your magic as a practitioner, to understand the types of tightness and to not make it worse. And so, for example, when an origin and insertion are moved very far away from each other, that's called tensile stress. The muscle is under stress. And I describe it exactly as a rubber band being pulled too tight over something that it's holding, like a pile of papers. If you think about muscle spindles in that same way, being pulled so tight that it's ready to pop, would you ever go in and try to stretch it or strip it with your thumbs, doing deep release as a manual therapist? Like, it just makes sense that you wouldn't do that, right? So we've got to know the types of tight. First, we got to know the lever system, the action and contraction, and lengthening is in response. And does this muscle need lengthening based on its type of tightness? And then what technique do I need to do to address that type of tightness? It's rarely that it needs to be deeply released or deeply stretched. And if it's the opposite, where it absolutely doesn't need to be lengthened anymore, you could make it worse, right? Think about a rubber band being pulled too tight. If you stretch it just a little bit longer because it's complaining about feeling too, like it's under too much duress, and you're just like, oh, just give it a little bit more rubber band, just pull apart a little more, just stretch a little bit more, or I'm going to strip those muscle spindles and pull those origins and insertions away from each other. Would that feel good? Or could it potentially damage the tissue? Potentially damage the tissue, and that's not what we're here for. All of us, I know you're here because you want to do good and create really great results with your clients, meaning get them out of pain and back to optimal living and optimal lifestyle. So Rhonda, I hope that answered your question. I hope that it covered exactly what you wanted us to cover. I could go on about that, but the rule of thumb is, pun not intended, the rule of thumb is that every tight muscle does not necessarily need to be released, and knowing the lever system and the types of tension will get you your answer. Okay, it was helpful. Good. Awesome, Rhonda. Happy to hear that. All right, we have time. Is there any other questions brewing? Anything else I can support you with while we're here today? Anything else coming up for you in your anatomy training or what you're up to with clients? Any questions that you have? Doesn't have to be what we've covered today. It could be anything. No, you guys are full? I've done my job here then. I've poured into you sufficiently. Okay, great. So I would love it for you guys to just take a look at standing. Take a look at your own standing. Take a look at your standing in your peeps. Notice if they're engaging intrinsically. Notice if they're adding joint actions that aren't supposed to be part of standing, and see what you can do to correct that, because you will be making a lot of bodies very happy. All right, my friends, it's so great to see you. Oh, hey, thanks, Lori. Yes, thank you for reminding me. Okay, great. If you guys want to continue the conversation, Lori's like, we should be talking about this. You're right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your support. If you want to continue the conversation, we do have a Facebook group, the Student Lounge, meaning that we're all students of the body. So we're there to continue the conversation. If you want to talk anything client-based or anatomy-based, you're welcome to join us there. And we will put the link in the bottom of the YouTube video as well, so you can find us. Head on over. You do get to be a practitioner of either movement or manual work. And you do get to let us know that, or we won't allow you in the group, because we will allow you if you're one of us. So anybody who's in the group, just know that we're all vetted and it's a safe place to talk anatomy and client work. And safe really matters when we're talking about anatomy, because one of the things that I am praying I resolve before my time here on the planet is complete is that we get to be confident. And there's a whole lot of what I don't know means I'm less than in this industry. And that doesn't get to stop. There's always more to learn. No one's ever going to know it all about the body. So any question that you have does not highlight an imposter in you as a practitioner. A question spurs conversation so we can all learn. So please feel free and open to have that kind of conversation in the lounge, because that's who's there watching. Nobody else is lurking. It's a very vetted group. So I just wanted to let you know that. All right, my friends. Thank you so much for joining me and for asking such rich questions and bringing so much to the table. I really appreciate it. I love being here with you guys on Tuesday. And until I see you next week, continue to do great work in the world.